Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth session of the Pixel Project's sixth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 14 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. Now, I'll be telling you a little more about the Reach for Pixels fundraiser a little later in the session. We have lots and lots of exclusive author goodies, lots of swag for you. But meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, you can go to www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so we have a really special guest today. We have a live discussion and Q&A session with the Queen of Grimdark herself, Anna Smith-Park. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I mean, it's just such an important project to be involved in. And thank you so much for asking me.
It's great to have you. We're so glad that you said yes to this. So let me give you guys a little introduction. Anna is the author of the critically acclaimed Gamel and BSF Award shortlisted Empires of Dust Grim Dark Epic Fantasy series, which comprises The Court of Broken Knives, The Tower of Living and Dying, and The House of Sacrifice. It's published by Harper Voyager in UK and Orbit in the US and Canada. Her favorite authors are Marie Renault, R. Scott Becker, and M. John Harrison. Previous jobs include English teacher, petty bureaucrat, and fetish model. And you may know her by the heels of her shoes. Okay, so Anna has very generously donated 2 special giveaways to the stash of author goodies that we have set up for donors on our Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. So let me tell you about them. And I think Anna might have the books with her to show you. First is a cracking good bundle of Anna's books. It's the Beginner's Guide to Anna Smith-Park bundle, all signed and personalized for you, comprising one first edition hardcover full set of Empires of Dust trilogy. All 3 books, there they are. Pretty awesome. And they're going to be all signed by Anna personally for you. And then also 1 hardcover copy of Legends 3, More Stories in Honor of David Gemmell, and 1 hardcover copy of Unfettered 3, an anthology, and 1 paperback copy of The Art of War anthology, and 1 paperback copy of Knave, a Blackguard anthology. And Anna's going to throw in as a bonus 4 signed postcards and 2 signed bookmarks. Okay, so that's just 1 bundle. The next thing is a Tuckerization, where Anna is going to make you a minor character in her next book. It's a chance for you to get your name, for you to name that character after yourself or a friend or anyone. And perhaps you may suffer a dramatic torture scene or a memorable death. Who knows? And let me just say there's only 1 of each type of Anna's giveaways available to donors anywhere in the world. So only 1 each. So you better hurry up and donate to get it, because once someone snaps it up, it's completely gone. I will be telling you how to get your hands on those things a little later in the session, and about how you can help the cause and donate. So stay tuned for that. But for now, Anna is going to do a reading, and then we're going to have a live discussion and then a Q&A session. Now you guys can participate as well. You're watching this on YouTube, you can type your questions on the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, but you must be signed into YouTube to do this. So type in your questions there, and Michelle and Regina, who are the chat box moderators, are going to relay the questions to us. I will read them out loud, and Anna will answer them. Okay, so I'm going to put Anna on screen now, and Anna, go ahead with your reading and tell us what you're going to read. And sorry to interrupt, but guys, it's grimdark, so there's going to be a bit of violence. So if you want, you can take a little break for about 6 to 10 minutes and then come back later and come back for the Q&A session. Okay, go ahead, Anna.
Okay, so I'm just going to read, actually probably, I don't suppose it'll take even 6 minutes. I'm going to read just a little passage from The House of Sacrifice, which is the 3rd and final volume in the series. It just came out this summer. So it's a sort of short passage. Yeah, as Anusha said, it is pretty violent. Yeah, it's just a little battle scene. So they rolled into Renaneth, grim and determined, the first charge against the town walls coinciding with the first rays of the morning sun. The sky flamed pink. The dawn was in the men's eyes, blinding. A great bank of clouds massed in the west behind them, so that as the defenders of Renaneth looked out at him, it must have seemed still to be black night over his camp. The advance guard had got the whole thing set and ready, burned out every surrounding farm and field. The people of Renaneth were hungry, frightened, wretched, and had been years before a single soldier from the army of Anrath appeared in view. The rotting buildings, houses sinking into the dry earth, brickwork crumbling, thin cattle, thin-faced children. The fires they burned to bake their bread in Renaneth were made of cattle shit. The water in the wells was greenish, stinking, gave his men the gripe. Grey, worn-out eyes stared over the walls at him. They can't remember me. They can't, he thought. They couldn't have known who I was. A sick man stumbling in bonds behind a horse, muttering curses. He was dressed now in silk and velvet, crowned in silver, his new cloak shimmering spun bronze. I swore that Renaneth would burn, that I would kill every person who lived there, that I would kill the beasts in the fields, the rats in the walls. The pleasure of it. Killing. The most beautiful thing in the world. Go through it, hacking them down, taking them to pieces, rending their lives down to fat and broken bone. Trample them, hiss and puke and dance and sing. The ram began to pound against the gates of Renaneth with the breaking morning, heaving itself, thrusting in, out, gleaming red with flayed skins. On the walls, the defenders cried out in terror, tried to let off arrows while their hands shook. Scaling ladders up against the walls, his men swarming up them. They looked like beetles climbing up in their armour, helmets making their heads like insects, like a dog running with fleas. Wyn Mathen, dear, eager man, first up the first ladder, a knife clutched in his teeth. The ram broke through the gates with the wood splintering. Rotten, it bulged and gave and ripped. It tasted meat rot, smelled pus. The way it gave, creaking, rotten, reminded him. His men roared with delight, pushing forward, too many almost to get through the break in the gates. He spurred his horse, rode in through the current of his army, the gilded hooves trampling his men's blood and the enemy's blood. On the walls above, Ryn waved, cheering, a sword in each hand, dripping. A man in silk robes went down on his knees in the filth before him, babbling, "The town surrenders, my lord king, the town surrenders unconditionally. If we had known you were coming, my lord king, my lord king." He killed him with one stroke of his sword, rode on in. So here we go again. I must start getting bored with this soon, you would have thought. It's getting kind of hard sometimes to know where we go from here, really, don't you think? Endless repetition. Kill, 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 tediously, unvaryingly, unendingly, kill, 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 kill. There's a girl of 5, screaming. Kill her. There's a big chap with a thing you must use for breaking up rocks. There's a boy with a meat cleaver. There's a woman with a hammer. There's a woman with a baby clutched to her breast. Kill them. There's a pregnant woman, one up even from the woman with the baby. There's an old man who's obviously blind. There's a starving, curly-haired beggar child with a withered leg. Kill them. Wait, look! How about a pregnant woman with a child and a crippled old grandfather trying to protect her? And his troops will torture them slowly, slice them up, despoil them, dismember them. That too much? Oh, and there's a big, strong, tough man dripping in the army of Anrath's blood, laying around him with a sword, rippling muscles, bulging biceps, standing wide to show his muscular, firm, strong thighs and arse. Spare him, let him live, enlist him. He'll be grateful for it when he finds someone else's rosy-cheeked children to chop up into little bits. Thus, one more town falls the same way as all the others. People die and suffer the same way they do every moment of every day, everywhere we're not looking. And we go on. I hear there's a village 2 days' march onwards. We can gut that. Then there's another town, then a village, then another village, then another town. death and joy. God, it's boring by now. Yes, it is.
That's it.
There we are.
That was great. That was pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, that bit kind of sums up kind of how I feel about violence, I guess.
All right.
And what I'm really trying to bring over in the books.
Okay. I'll probably come back to refer to that particular thing again a bit later, but for now, let's start with a kind of general question. So your books feature some really memorable female characters that are complex and motivated, and they are people with distinct personalities and characteristics. They range from women who are confident and dominant to those who are quiet and submissive, as well as women whose personalities evolve as their stories progress. So my first question is, what or who are your inspirations for your female character?
Oh, so they all just kind of, I think they're all probably me. Thalia is definitely me. She's always been with me. She's kind of been the heroine of every story I've ever told myself. I used to tell myself stories all the time as a child, and Marith and Thalia were always the central characters in them. And she is quite a passive character. She begins the story very much as the conventional love interest, because of course so many of the stories I've read and I've seen, that's the role the woman occupies. It is kind of, when you begin writing, you do almost just kind of fall into this trap of writing a woman in this slightly sort of passive support role, because that's just the way so many stories in Western culture are presented, and so many films present the female character. But she's also, I guess she is my response to that. She's me thinking about the way that it's almost it's almost problematic to say, well, we'll just write, the only way you can have a female character who's strong and interesting and independent and autonomous is to make them kind of the warrior figure, the protagonist figure. And actually, if you look at history, throughout history, most women have been, and in fact, a lot of poets in the world, most women still are hugely defined by who their father is, who their husband is, who their sons are. And I kind of wanted to write about that, about a woman who is autonomous in herself and is a character in her own right, but is also very much defined by her relationships by her relationship with the main character, and male character in the novel, because for most of history, most women's roles were defined in those terms. It seems a bit unfair to say a woman couldn't have had individual fulfillment in those terms. You're kind of almost writing off the vast majority of women throughout history. But I mean, none of that, I guess, was conscious. It was just Thalia just kind of revealing herself to me, emerging. Landra, I guess, was written more consciously as a slightly more, she obviously is much more kind of independent in many ways. Mm-hmm. But she is a character I have less sympathy for, I think. I have far more sympathy for Thalia. Thalia I've identified with much more closely than I do with Landra. And actually...
Sorry, that's pretty interesting. Go on.
I should say, and actually Bilal, who has a very secondary role, originally sort of appears just as this kind of scheming, the kind of, the representative of the kind of deliberately and very knowingly orientalized upper classes in the city, this sort of fabulous and deliberately orientalized exotic city, and who was written to be that kind of a very problematic stereotype, but absolutely transcends it and becomes absolutely human. And I think by the end of the series, in a strange way, she was actually one of my favorite. She was probably possibly one of my favorite characters, and really just kind of, I really, really feel a great deal for her, of emotional attachment to her.
It's pretty cool how I think it's a kind of meta in a way where you lean hard into the stereotype, but at the same time you're kind of breaking the stereotype, So, which leads to my next question: how do you still break stereotypes or lean hard into them while still giving these female characters agency and showing them dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls.
Oh goodness. So again, I don't think a lot of it was conscious. I read a huge amount of epic fantasy, obviously, and also I read a lot of sort of military historical novels and historical novels set around sort of classical Greece, ancient Rome. The period I studied and the period I love is the ancient world. And of course, most of the characters in those stories are men, simply because they were such incredibly misogynistic societies. We know so little about most of the women who lived there. I've read a huge number of biographies and histories and novelizations of the life of Alexander the Great, and there are just no women in it. I mean, it's a story of a man who was almost certainly a gay man and his army. There are just no women, and the women there are, basically the one woman there is in any significance is his mother, Olympia, who was never presented in positive light. So I've just read a huge number of these books that are very, very masculine, that present women in a very, very subservient roles, very limited roles. But I guess I always saw that as being a sign of how problematic these societies were. That, part of the kind of tragedy of Alexander's life is this kind of the way this is a totally masculine society he's existing in, that it's a society where emotion is frowned on, where kind of a society that's totally governed by a sort of militaristic violence, sort of heavy drinking, male violence, very kind of homosocial, women being very excluded. And it always seemed to me that was very clear from everything, that this is not a pleasant place for men or women to live. I mean, interesting, I did Ask Anything on Reddit Fantasy last week to raise awareness, fixed projects as well. And I was talking about R. Scott Baker on that, because in R. Scott Baker's books, the Second Apocalypse series, are a profoundly misogynistic world. It's the first 3 books. There are 2 female characters. One is a sex slave. One is a sex worker who is a caste menial and therefore effectively a slave. And they are the only 2 named women in the book. And there is a huge amount of, a lot of people kind of say all these books are profoundly misogynistic, they're profoundly problematic, and they are profoundly misogynistic. But that's the point. As far as I can see, there is no way, if anyone reads those books and comes out thinking, gosh, what a fantastic society this is. God, well, it would have been great to get, back in those old times when women had absolutely no autonomy and you didn't speak to women, you just treated women as basically as nothing. The women are just treated absolutely as sex objects. The idea that they have any mental life at all and any emotional life is just inconceivable to most of the male characters. And that's kind of the point. And it astonishes me that anyone would ever say. But when I end up sort of making this defense, people look at me like, gosh, I've never thought of it like that. It's almost kind of horrifying. Like, what, you think anyone is presenting this world as somewhere that anyone would want to live, male or female? So I guess I just never. When things like I remember watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian, which is a film I've seen so many times, and I guess I just never realised that people didn't watch it, taking it as pretty clearly, this guy is a very frightening fascist. This is not a pleasant world. One would never want to be this person, or would not want to be around these people. And that's almost why you're watching it. I kind of never realised it was any different to people receiving it in a way that's any different than you might receive, say, Das Boot or Downfall, or It just astonishes. It just really has almost come as a kind of weird reverse naivety to realise. Well, that old joke about James Bond. I had no idea when people do that joke about, all women want to sleep with him, all men want to be him. I had no idea people actually wanted to be James Bond, because the thought of being James Bond is absolutely horrifying. This absolutely sort of sterile, incredibly just kind of meaningless, horrible, violent, paranoid existence.
Unfeeling person. But I think maybe it's because of the way it's depicted. It's sort of depicted as you should believe that this kind of person and this kind of life is so glamorous and everybody should want to be this person. But really, what you say is right. When you think about it the other way, it's such a horrible way to live.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so which is that kind of the passage I read, and actually and a lot of the kind of fighting scenes in my books. I wanted to bring that across, that kind of sense that it is seductive. And I mean, in some of the battle scenes I write, there is a great deal of eroticism. Essentially, I'm kind of pointing out that this experience of male violence. There is clearly something. There is something seductive of it. I mean, I joke, oh no, it's like astonishes me that whole thing about all men want to be James Bond, all men want to sleep with James Bond. But of course, it's true that people find violence incredibly attractive, and of course, it's true that lots of people, male and female, find James Bond deeply sexually alluring. And of course, it's true that that kind of violence, male violence, is extremely enticing. And I kind of wanted to put that kind of double-edged element, that it is absolutely chilling, and yet obviously when we're watching it, we're also feeling some kind of thrill, that there is that kind of sense of this is somehow, this is violence, and particularly masculine violence, is having some kind of complex effect in the human psyche, that we are an incredibly violent species. And obviously there is something about that kind of glorification of violence which really does press everyone's buttons, basically. And that's problematic. And we need to accept that that's problematic.
Yeah.
And that it is chilling and frightening and horrifying, the reality of it.
Yeah. So speaking of violence in reality, now 1 in 4 women in the UK have experienced domestic violence. And you yourself have always been very open about the domestic abuse that you suffered, because you want to make sure that other women and girls are aware that it happens and aware of red flags in relationships. Has your experience influenced the way that you approach your writing, especially male and female relationships? Any examples that in your book, and particularly since it's fantasy, you mentioned during your AMA in August that the preeminent genre for fantasy is the preeminent genre for writing about power and violence.
Yeah, I have been very open about the fact. Yeah, I had a appallingly abusive relationship when I was in my late teens and early 20s, which actually just stopped me writing for years and years. I really just came out of that. When I was in the relationship, when I came out of it, I really had no self-esteem. I was absolutely destroyed in terms of my self-esteem and my self-value. But I was just sort of sucked into that trap of really not realizing what was happening to me, because of the way that violence against women is so often presented. It's that creepy guy. People always say after someone has been arrested for doing some appalling thing, he kept himself to himself, or he was a bit strange, he was a bit of a loner. And that kind of way that Hollywood presents kind of the myth of the serial killer, that there's these, this sort of strange, creepy guy who is just obviously so different from the society around them and so kind of sticks out as being unpleasant. And actually, of course, to realize, and is, what they're doing is so extreme, and to realize that yourself as a kind of middle class student at a very good university, having always received good grades, had a really good upbringing, to be in a relationship and it takes you a lot. It took me a long time to realize that, because that what you see in the movies of a very strange, creepy person beating up a woman who's living on the streets or whatever, that the way it's so kind of made so different and so extreme, that to admit that it is happening to you, to me personally, was really strange and difficult, because it just seems so kind of that this isn't domestic violence, this isn't a bad thing, this is just normal life, because this isn't something, this isn't extreme, I'm not facing death here. Mm-hmm. But just that kind of insidious little erosion of everything I felt about myself and everything I valued about myself over a long period of time. And it took me such a long time to realize what was going on, and to kind of make it really clear to people that, and so it really matters to me to make it clear to other people that what's going on to them to wake up to the fact that, you know, possibly they are being a victim of something, possibly think, you know, if a relationship feels problematic, it probably is problematic. And I guess that kind of relationship between power in the novels is brought out in the novels. The relationships between some of the different characters and their sexual relationships, and the kind of their history together and things. I wanted it to be much more subtle and much more complicated than just, you know, here is a bad man, and we can all tell he's a bad man because he's doing bad things to a woman. And here is the woman, we can all see she's a victim because she's suffering bad things. And I wanted to make it much more complicated. The relationships just seem much more real and complicated. I mean, I've had a lot of people talk about the relationship between Marith and Thalia and what is going on there. And I actually think it's very much a relationship of equals. And I don't think that's the problematic relationship. But then I know some other people who think it is a deeply problematic relationship from either perspective. And it's really kind of interesting, that kind of complexity of making it much more complicated and difficult, and actually making you think about different people's relationship, different people's position in a relationship, was something I did want to kind of bring out.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, fantasy is absolutely a genre of power. In its most basic, all the kind of fantasy narratives about, you know, they're about kings and princes and, you know, these kind of and mages and sorcerers and knights, or they're about, you know, the farm boy, the chosen one, the farm boy, and the whole point of him is not that he's the common, you know, he's not a commoner who's going to live and die a commoner and do nothing of importance, that he's going to assume power. And they're always narratives of power. And then as soon as you start bringing gender and personal relationships and family into that those relationships of power just absolutely explode. And that's always what I've always seen in fantasy. That kind of, it's preeminently a genre exploring familiar relationships and romantic relationships and just interpersonal relationships, but from this absolutely kind of incredibly ramped up, kind of absurdly ramped up position of total power, and how people relate to each other in those positions.
Yeah. So you mentioned how violence, domestic violence or domestic abuse can be very subtle. There's that book which is turned into a series on Netflix called You, where, you know, this person, a very charming, good-looking man, basically stalks a young woman, and it all seems he's not one of those creepy guys who, you know, hides in the basement and, you know, looks funny. He's, you know, he's not somebody that you think is going to be a stalker or a violent person, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And that had pretty much a big impact, I think. But what is weird, I don't know, tell me what you think about this, is that people started thinking, like, commenting, there were a lot of comments online about how, oh, this character, he's so attractive, he's so sexy, and, you know, isn't it amazing or wonderful how he, you know, pursues her. So have you found that happening in anything that you've seen online or anything that you've written as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's that kind of tragedy, isn't it? That I guess it's a sort of, I don't know, it's probably is women, we know, it is a classic example of women being absolutely the victim of patriarchy. That kind of Heathcliff kind of idea of, you know, the damaged, charming, oh, he'll pursue you to any lengths, you know, he'll follow you around the world, declaring how much he loves you, you know, he'll get down his knees and tell you he'll die without you, and that kind of, the whole kind of women who love too much thing, where you're then trained to kind of, what you might feel about this, that somehow, you know, because someone who has this great passionate desire for you as a woman, you have to reciprocate. Mm-hmm. You can't possibly leave this person. It's that kind of chivalrous, it's the kind of the old sort of white knight thing, you know, the lover and the beloved. You can't possibly want to turn down this kind of amazing, obsessional, amazing, charming, obsessional love. It must, you know, it's almost a woman's responsibility to respond to that and accept that and say, well, if he loves me, then I must therefore, you know, it's almost not fair if I don't love him, which is so problematic. And yet we fall for it again and again. I mean, God knows I have. And again, I mean, the character of Marith is almost kind of exploding that. He is this sort of messed up character And his whole kind of shtick, I guess, is that someone will find him and heal him, and it's all going to be wonderful, and he just needs to find the woman who will care for him and heal him. And actually, I mean, I tried to kind of draw out that quite a few of the characters, male and female, do clearly have sort of sexual and romantic feelings for him, and he's kind of, he's wandering around with those big puppy dog eyes, wanting someone, if only someone will understand. The last guy didn't understand. I don't know what happened to him, but the next woman, the next person might understand. But I wanted to kind of unpack just how destructive that is. That kind of the kind of Jim Morrison myth of destructive, messed up. It's not about how you feel about him. It's about how he feels about himself and how he's able to create wonderful poetry out of his feelings for you and his messed upness. And the woman is always just kind of totally in the background, just doing up, just kind of, totally just sort of just drowned in this wave of his tortured genius. And we're just kind of sold it as this amazing thing. What could be better for a woman than to be there picking up the pieces while this messed up, alcoholic, totally unfaithful person goes and fulfills his creative genius? And I want to kind of show the reality of that, and that from a fairly personal perspective. So yeah, Marith is a lot of that. And I wrote a couple of short stories as well. One is I wrote two parallel short stories about silkies. So silkies, there are silkies, they mentioned a couple of times in the Empire of Dust series. Silkies, people who don't know, it's a kind of Celtic myth about the seal women. They're women who swim, who are seals, and they live in the sea as seals, the Atlantic. And then, but if a man catches one and steals her seal skin, she's then trapped as a beautiful woman, and she can, and as long as he's got possession of her seal skin, she can't go back to the sea. So what usually happens is the man then marries her and keeps her seal skin locked up, and she has to marry him and has to keep house for him and has to basically accept being raped by him, essentially, because he's got her skin, and she'll just be looking for a skin, and eventually if she finds it, she'll go back into the sea. So I wrote two parallel stories, one which was published in Three Crows magazine, which I think is being published as a book, as an anthology of their best of stories, from the man's point of view, the point of view of a fisherman in a community where this is just standardly how men get their women. They go, you go and find a seal skin, capture it, and the owner of the seal skin then has to marry you, and that's how you find a wife. And then I wrote a parallel story which is going in an anthology called Lost Gods for a publisher called Grimbold, from the point of view of the silky, who's looking for her skin, but at this point is married to married, inverted commas, is the victim of continual, basically repeated rape. So this man, she has children, she has a household, and actually, it much she wants to leave, at the same time she now has children. That complicates things. In my version of the story, she can't take the children with her, so what does she do? And I was using that to really, really write around women's experiences of domestic violence, of coerced marriage, of basically the expectation that there still is on women in many parts of the world, and which women have always lived for. That it's not about a relationship. Women's lives are not about their own personal fulfillment, intellectual or sexual. They're about making a good marriage and having children. And in fact, for a lot of women, economically, whatever they wanted, making the best thing for them was to make a good marriage, because then they had someone to support them economically. And that was the best route for a lot of women. That was the only sensible choice for a lot of women economically. So I wanted to use this sort of horrible story of the silky or the mermaid to really explore women's experience in marriage, and in a marriage which isn't a marriage that's based on an imbalance of power, as most relationships between men and women were up until very recently, and still are in lots of parts of the world. And about how actually when things like children come into it, it does actually become far more complicated than simply, well, obviously the best thing she can do is leave, because then the women's motion then becomes very complicated. And I wanted to really write about some of that, again, from my own personal experience, and just from my own experiences of, even now as a mother with children, that kind of pressure of the competition between my own fulfillment in terms of my writing, my work, my own personal independence, and the fact that as someone with dependent children, I have no independence lots of the time and autonomy. My life is entirely dictated by my children, which has to be because they're very small and completely helpless and vulnerable. So obviously, I have to give up a huge amount for them. And that is the kind of huge trap that women have always faced, whatever kind of relationship they're in, whatever their personal circumstances. And I want to explore that. So yeah, that was a really interesting series of stories I wrote that kind of, I'd like to hope, did some justice to the really complicated stuff about even within kind of loving relationships, let alone imposed relationships or disastrous relationships or abusive relationships.
Yeah, complex.
Yes.
Let's go to a slightly different topic. Let's talk about grimdark and violence.
Right.
So the Emperors of Dust books are classified as grimdark epic fantasy. So of course, lots of violence, including violence against women. Of course, depictions of war. There are soldiers and warrior cultures. Plenty of toxic masculinity on display. So can you tell us how you, as a writer, how do you find a balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story and giving the reader a realistic depiction of violence without being gratuitous?
Oh, so I think I probably am. I don't think there is such a thing as non-gratuitous violence. I mean, when you describe, I don't need to. Yeah, kind of. You know, the one thing I don't write, people know, you might notice, is lengthy non-consensual sex scenes. So I have sex scenes in the books which are entirely consensual. There are a lot of references to sexual violence, obviously. I mean, the passage I just read, it's pretty clear what's going to happen to some of the women in the village.
Yeah.
There are fairly explicit references to people talking about sexual violence. I have men talking about the fact that they're excited to be going into a city because they've been told the women in this city are all really hot, and it's going to be great when they get in there, and the women can just do what the women will just have to do whatever they want and things. I make the reality of what life was like for women in a war, what life is like for women in a war situation, which is extreme and continual experience of risk of sexual violence, basically. I want to make that absolutely explicit. But what I don't ever do is do very lengthy descriptions of it, because I just don't feel as much point, to be honest. It just feels kind of, what on earth is the point? It just horrifies me, those kind of very lengthy, gratuitous, Game of Thrones style kind of, oh look, she moves her arm a bit when she's fighting him off and get a really good shot of her nipple while she's fighting him off. Kind of, it's
Yeah.
unacceptable the way that it is clearly being shown there, partly for titillation. Mm-hmm. And I find that, just so, because you're just, you're writing lengthy sexualized descriptions of women's bodies, and the women involved are not consenting. It's just totally unacceptable. So I never write lengthy descriptions of sexual violence in those ways, although I'm very, very clear that there is a great deal of sexual violence happening, because it's important to keep reminding people that we live in a world in which women are absolutely, basically, the societies in which sexual violence against women is endemic are very often the societies in which women's ability to do anything about the likely consequences of sexual violence against women, i.e. have access to contraception and sexual health care and abortion and such things, is also often extremely limited, which is a pretty horrifying paradox. And I want to make that kind of thing explicit in my writing, but I don't want to make the kind of, well, look, she's just going to use the word thighs, nudge, 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 while writing about that, because it just seems entirely unacceptable. But the male on male violence I write, it is not sexual violence, it is two men hitting each other with swords, but I do make the erotic connection there, that there is clearly an element of, again, of some kind of male pleasure in violence and killing that is fundamentally linked to eroticism, the kind of Freudian sort of sex and death drive thing. And I don't I want to write about that. I want to make people force up to accept that kind of all acts of violence have some kind of element of sexual tension within them. I mean, just look at a sword. Look at two men hitting each other with swords. It's not.
Yep.
You do not have to be Freud to work out there's something possibly going on there. It's and I wanted to kind of bring that out. That kind of one of the reasons that violence has been such a constant in human society, I think, is one because it is usually a group of usually men having this very kind of homosocial camaraderie, close friendship, actually a kind of emotional connection, which men are very often denied in other circumstances, with these kind of intense moments of what is clearly in some kind of complicated way sexual pleasure. And I wanted to be fairly explicit about that. It's kind of and again, I may ask people questions about what it is that they think, what it is that we're doing when we engage in violence, and why it is that it's so difficult not to. Why kind of, I mean, it's so, when you read a lot of history, there's that constant, like, well, why does it, why is war breaking out again and again? This constant sense when you're reading it, when you're reading accounts of the kind of period leading up to wars, it's this kind of, well, why is this happening? Why are these people pushing each other or pushing themselves to the point where violence is exploding? Why doesn't everyone take a step back and just take a deep breath and agree to, okay, we're not particularly happy about whatever kind of trade conditions on this particular border, or kind of we're not particularly happy about the fact that you're claiming this city and we're claiming this city and your claim is probably better than ours. But why don't we just take a step back from that? It's, it is, as a mother, it's like watching children. You watch your children and it's just like, why? It doesn't matter. You're fighting over a small bit of plastic that cost £3, and by tomorrow you'll have forgotten about it. And if I put it in the bin tonight, you're never going to remember it existed. And you're screaming at each other, and you're going to end up, I'm going to end up screaming at you. And, we're all going to end up in a really bad mood, and the whole day is going to be ruined over nothing. And you really feel that reading history. Why are you doing this? Why are you not behaving like this? You're supposed to be adult politicians. How have you got to stop? Take a few deep breaths. Everybody just calm down. And, there is something so deep within us that just constantly drives us to violence. And that kind of trying to explore why and unpack why and really make sense of why was something that was really, really important to me. And I guess was kind of, again, none of this was conscious. It wasn't like I sat down and thought, hey, I'm going to write all this in a book. It's just when I started writing all of that, all the series is my kind of critique of history and of all the historical novels I've read and of all the epic fantasy novels I've read. I mean, there's a lot of the kind of people like Philippa Gregory actually write the kind of very women-centric histories of often of women at the courts of kings. Her series of novels about the different wives of Henry VIII, and also the Red Queen and the White Queen, the novels about the women during the Wars of the Roses, which are about women who are wives and mothers and mistresses in a totally male situation, sort of in a absolutely male-dominated society, and they're great and wonderful books, and they're full of women basically kind of pointing out these idiot men around them, but also totally trapped within the kind of the worlds that these men have created. And kind of Empires of Dust a lot. Empires of Dust is hugely influenced by Philippa Gregory, actually. If anyone wants to read a really good novel about the awfulness of kind of toxic masculinity, then go and read her novel about Catherine Howard, because it's just chilling. It really is.
Well, speaking of male violence, many people in the anti-violence against women movement say that male violence is the main, if not the root cause of violence against women and girls, and of violence in general. How do you think stories and books like yours can help move the conversation forward in a constructive way?
So yeah, I think hopefully if one person comes away from reading my books and starts really thinking about what male violence means, and thinking about what power means. I mean, if you look at someone like, the whole central to the character of Marith is the kind of unpacking the kind of hero narrative. He is in many ways presented as a hero. He's presented in some ways as this kind of shining heroic figure who's making all these promises about the well-being, leading his men to glory, leading his men to triumph, more glory, more money, more power. And that, again, that kind of, the myth of the male leader is incredibly seductive. And what I find problematic in some sort of fourth wave feminism is the way that it's very much kind of assumed that the problem with patriarchal culture is that it doesn't allow women to have those kind of power privileges. The kind of notion, how great that kind of notion of we need more women in business. I nearly said we nearly said more women businessmen, which is absolutely telling. That kind of, we need more women CEOs. We need more women who are head of the kind of the big Wall Street banks. We need more women involved in that kind of big power, big money environments. That whole thing about big dick energy, which I just found so vile and problematic. That notion of kind of, and that when you have an equal number of male and female CEOs and corporate lawyers and corporate finances, that will be wonderful. When I find that so problematic, I find the whole notion of the kick-ass female heroine, that a kind of a fantastic feminist fantasy novel would be The Lord of the Rings or The Wheel of Time, but the hero is going to save the world and kick the bad guy's ass. And the great shining white knight, and I mean, when I say white knight, I mean every connotation that I could have. Mm-hmm. As long as that's a woman, that's all just wonderful. And what you're not doing is ever unpacking kind of, well, what does that actually mean? What does the kind of notion, as soon as you've got power and violence and hierarchy are inherently anti-feminist. They're inherently incredibly oppressive of women. And simply sort of saying, well, we'll have a woman in power, I really don't see how that does anything for 99% of women on Earth. And that, I think, I really want to come across in what I'm writing, that kind of, that, it's not about just ending up with a woman on the Iron Throne is not some kind of great, amazing feminist triumph. It's kind of, it's the same old, except it's been done by, it's just been kind of, it's still the same privileging of power, it's still the same privileging of violence, it's still the same privileging of hierarchy. And actually, racism and misogyny are so kind of bound up with those notions of power, with power structures. And I really would like, if one person takes that kind of thing that I'm talking about in the books, but also the kind of more simple sort of, I suppose, the kind of sense of understanding of people's powerlessness, of male powerlessness, that how destructive that kind of, I think it's fairly clear from the books that the men's lives are totally destroyed by the kind of by the violent society they're living in, and by the kind of fetishization of war and violence that they're experiencing. They do not have happy lives. It's really clear to me, particularly in the narrative arc of Tobias, that his life would have been so much better if right back when he was a young man, he'd been able to marry and have children and live in quiet anonymity, raising children and just living a very, very peaceful life. And if one person reads that and gets that kind of sense that actually just living a quiet, anonymous life, raising children and not aspiring to power and glory and triumph, that's everything I could want, basically.
Okay. We're going to go to some audience questions. So people have been asking questions, and they've been waiting a while. So I better get to them. So I think the first one will be from Scarlett Kinjaku1, who says, "Hi Anna, Jeff Bryan from Maryland here. What is one of the most common mistakes or issues you see in portrayals of women in fantasy by male writers?"
Oh, hi Jeff. I was talking about this, actually, I spoke about this when I was at Gen Con a couple of weeks ago. I was over in the US for Gen Con, which was amazing. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a common mistake, but the issue of the woman who is strong and violent, strong, the strong warrior woman, she's not beholden to a man. She's not going to take, she's not going to take things lying down. She's strong, she's independent, she's not the love interest, she's tough, but she's all of those things because her backstory is she was a victim of sexual violence. And it's so common. There's a wonderful joke, a cartoon I've seen of a group of women, I think it's women from superhero movies sitting around, and one of them says something like, "I'm a strong, feisty, independent woman. I can't wait to find out what my tragic backstory is." That it's such a kind of common, just kind of lazy, as it, just a horrible kind of, the only reason this woman can possibly be independent of men and not interested in men and tough and autonomous must be because something really awful happened to her in her past that has traumatized her and shaped her. The kind of Sarah Connor from the Terminator thing, why is she tough and why is she shown doing all those scenes, getting herself tough and lifting weights and boxing and making herself strong? Well, she's doing it because that awful thing happened to her, because she's went through all that awful stuff in Terminator 1, so now she needs to toughen up. The idea she might just be an independent, strong, autonomous woman, and yet have had a really happy home life, and it was all lovely, and actually her father loved her. Her father was just a really nice person, really nice, kind person. Her brothers were really nice, kind people, and nothing bad has ever happened to her. She just happens to be a strong, independent woman. Basically, having been a victim of sexual violence and having a really great arse is not a complicated, fully realized three-dimensional character for a woman.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Okay. I'm going to go to one more question. I think I don't think we may not have time for all the audience questions, but we'll see. We'll try. So next one from Peter McLean. Hi, Anna. What are you working on now that Empires of Dust has ended? Are we going to get the Plague Marine story you keep promising me? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I am writing a story about Plague Marines. Yes. I love Warhammer 40k. I grew up with Warhammer 40k, and for some obscure reason, the Plague Marines are always the ones that really appeal to me. I mean, again, they're just such a kind of extreme example of violence and the consequence of violence. They're just they're the ones who are just absolutely corrupted and are just kind of rotting and and I'm writing a very, very strange piece that is essentially a stream of consciousness narrative from the perspective of a Plague Marine who's going through this kind of thing where he has not realized he is separate from he's beginning to not be able to be separating himself from his weapon. So he's essentially becoming his own weapons while also rotting. Gosh. I have no idea what will happen. I suspect the Black Library people will take one look and say, "Whoa, this is not not publishable." But I'm writing that at the moment because, again, that kind of thing is really interesting. You're trying to get inside, trying to imagine oneself inside the mind of someone in that kind of extreme position is far more interesting than writing a description of them doing something horrible to someone else, because it's that trying to imagine oneself in the position and mind of in the mind of someone that we always like to think we'd never be. We never always want to think we'd never be the person doing this stuff. We'd always be the victim of it. And actually, history kind of suggests that a lot of us have been the person doing this kind of stuff, not the person being the victim of it. And actually, so that's always the more interesting part, I think, is to understand how easy it is to cross the line, and actually how easy it is to get into the head of being able to completely justify what you're doing is much more interesting. So so I've no idea whether Black Library will just look at that in absolute horror. And at the moment, I'm also just beginning to work on something much more about women and motherhood, and in it, sort of much more very, very personal to me. But it's the very early stages. Writing Empires of Dust was so difficult for me. The ending of it was so emotionally exhausting for me. I just poured out. it was very easy to write, but it was pouring out my own soul. It was absolutely just kind of, I just emptied myself out, emptied out everything I've ever felt, really gone down to the depths of my soul, emptied out into those books. So it took me a long time to get my head together to be in any state to write anything else after that. And I'm just beginning to write something new now, kind of really just finally getting it emotionally together again to write.
Well, we're all very glad that you wrote those books. So thank you very much for them. If you're just joining us now, guys, we are with Grimdark Queen Anna Smith Park, and she's answering your questions and some of our questions as well. I think I'm going to go to a question about stories, since you are an author. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. In your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Yeah, so I think, the problematic bit in some books comes when you have the bit where the character kind of justifies themselves. You have something where you have a character who's gay, so you feel someone else needs to make a little speech about, hey, that's fine, I'm happy for you being gay, that's all right. Or you have the kind of story, you have the sort of the classic, the kind of the character who's the sort of, the classic, the black best friend in the otherwise usually white story, and you have some, it's all about them being black, and it's all about, their epic struggle, and things like that always just seem very kind of reductive, or the kind of, the disabled character, and it's all about them being disabled and their epic struggle about being disabled, and their kind of how the world is so against them, and and of course the world is deeply unfair, the world is deeply racist, the world is deeply homophobic. When you're disabled, just being able to go to the bathroom is incredibly difficult in a public environment. But actually the great wonderful thing about writing, and particularly about writing science fiction and fantasy, is that you can kind of ignore all that stuff and just show the world as it should be. You can show the world as it should be, just kind of not just show people just existing. And it's not about the fact that you have a diverse cast. It's not signaling some kind of amazing, and now I'm going to make some great speech about how appalling racism is. It's just carrying on having people not being racist and having a diverse cast. It's that kind of just making it fairly explicitly obvious that in any kind of basic normal society, people do not behave like this. You'll notice in my books, this is really getting away from talking about gendered violence, but you notice the two things that people aren't, particularly in the Empires of Dust, are either racist or homophobic, because both of those things are actually totally socially constructed. There are reasons why you can look. There are historical reasons why Western European culture is profoundly homophobic and profoundly racist, and they're really, really stupid reasons. I can just write a society where people don't have to have had those hundreds and thousands of years of people being fucking stupid. Sorry, people being stupid, and and just kind of have a default. You just take people on their own merits. People are really horrible in the Empires of Dust, but they're really horrible to each other, and they do horrible things, but they're not institutionally racist or institutionally homophobic, because I don't see why, if I'm creating a world, I should create those same just ignorant stupidities. And similarly with violence against women. So I write a very misogynistic world. It is a very deliberately misogynistic world. When I talk, I'd use the words men and the word soldier completely interchangeably. And there's a reason, that is done for a purpose. But on the other hand, other worlds don't have to be explicitly misogynistic. That whole kind of bizarre thing about people saying, well, it's not historically accurate. Well, that's because it's not history. It doesn't have to be based on, yes, medieval feudal Europe was incredibly misogynistic, although probably less misogynistic than Victorian male upper class historians like to present it to be. But you don't have to make your fantasy world based on a white upper class, probably massively sexually repressed Victorian imperialist man's fantasy about medieval Britain. You don't have to base your fantasy on that. You could base your fantasy on something totally different. We don't need to keep repeating these tropes. R. Scott Baker does it for a reason. I do it for a reason. But you don't have to do it. You could create all kinds of worlds, amazing, wonderful worlds, with all kinds of incredible, fantastical possibilities, where violence against women is taken as totally, absolutely just unimaginable. It just doesn't happen any more than racism has to happen or homophobia has to happen. And that, I think, is a really powerful thing. It's not, yes, it's highlighting the negative, drawing attention to how awful reality, how awful the world is at the moment, how awful the world was. But you can also use fantasy to create, particularly kind of not so grimdark fantasy, to create a wonderful world in which these things don't apply. If you look at, for example, the Cushiel novels, they are kind of it's a fantasy about medieval France, or Renaissance France, but with an assumption that issues around sexism and misogyny and homophobia just never apply, just don't apply. And I should imagine it'd be a fairly great place to live. Teardons would be a really great place to live. You can do all kinds of, if you look at, say, Melissa Crusoe's series of novels, they're lovely, lovely novels, again, set in a kind of fantasy, Renaissance Venice, The Tethered Mage. Again, they're just based on the assumption that this is a fairly tolerant, pleasant society without issues around structural misogyny. And you might say, well, that's extremely unconvincing for a faux medieval Venice, but then it's a faux medieval Venice. It's got fire mages in it. It's got all the nice bits of medieval Venice and none of the nasty bits of medieval Venice, and that's kind of lovely. And I think fantasy can do that really, really well. And science fiction and fantasy can really explore that, other possibilities of other ways of being that you just don't need to think. You don't need to have that baggage weighting you down all the time.
So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, despite the rising number of prominent, well-respected, well-known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile, misogynistic, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming, the books or cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
See, actually, it's an issue for the men in the culture to deal with. So a lovely positive thing that happened to me was that a while ago, someone had written an article. It was deeply it was called something like "The Women of Grimdark." So it was just basically a sort of short article which listed me, Deborah Wolfe, Anna Stevens, and a couple of other women. And it was called "The Woman of Grimdark." It wasn't even some kind of the latest grimdark novels, and it just happened everyone on the list was women. It was an explicitly gendered list. I found it slightly problematic because it was a kind of there's the grimdark authors, and then there's the women grimdark authors who are obviously a bit different because they're
women.
Yeah, they're women. They must be. They're in special lists. But anyway, I mean, it was an entire. But what then happened was that some people made some really horrible comments in a Facebook group about this, saying, "Oh, these women only got published as a gimmick. Women writing grimdark is just a gimmick. No one actually read these books. Has anyone ever read these books? Because I haven't read any of these books. I never would read any of these books. It's just a marketing gimmick." And what was lovely was a whole load of male reviewers came in saying, "Well, I reviewed all of these books and I gave them all 4 or 5 star ratings. And are you calling me a liar?" It wasn't a women's problem that we had to kind of wade in and say, "But I think you'll find it isn't a publicity stunt. Look, I think my book is good and I think these other books are good." And it wasn't a woman's issue. It wasn't an us having to defend ourselves and justify ourselves. It was some of the other men in the scene coming in and kind of saying, "Look, I really enjoyed that book. And you can see I really enjoyed that book because I've done a big review of that book. So just bud out from saying that no one's read these books. And that, I think, is what has to happen. It's not, I can argue with someone until I'm blue in the face, but actually, oddly, I do know something about blood and about pain and about violence because I've given birth. But, that is probably never, I'm never going to win an argument with the kind of person who just says my books are only published as a gimmick, because obviously I don't know anything about women, don't know anything about blood. But
Yeah.
another man coming in and saying, actually, just, either just shut up or get out of this scene, basically. That it's a male issue. Men need to take responsibility for dealing with this. And I think they are, actually. And the scene feels a lot better for actually men beginning to begin to really take up to this as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Which sort of kind of brings me to my next question, which is about parents. So parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. You're a mother yourself. You're speaking about it just now. What do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and get boys involved in helping to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think boys is the key. So I spend a lot of time, obviously, I have a son and a daughter. I spend a lot of time talking to my daughter about self-esteem and about absolutely valuing herself. But I mean, in a way, all children are not born misogynist, children are not born racist, children are not born bigoted. Children are not born, all children are born absolutely, just absolutely believing they are the centre of the entire universe. Children are not born lacking self-confidence and seeing themselves as somehow inferior to the other half of the species. Girls obviously have to make sure you support their self-esteem, support their sense of who they are, support their sense of autonomy. But the big thing is boys. The big thing is making boys aware that they are not the centre of the universe, making boys aware about things like consent, making them aware about, I say to my son all the time, if someone says, stop poking me, stop poking them. If someone says, don't do that, it's annoying me, you stop doing that. It's that kind of talking basic things about consent and autonomy and thinking about others. It's not the girl issue, isn't girls, the issue is boys. It's bringing boys up to think. It's still so marked, things like, boys. The thing that really sums up for me actually is things like t-shirts. You see t-shirts on sale for girls and they say things like Daddy's Little Princess. And and at least that suggests some kind of sense of value. Being Daddy's Little Princess is a good thing to do. It's just that someone values you. It's just you have some kind of importance. You might disagree with every single fundamental part of that sentence in terms of power and royalty and all that kind of stuff. But the idea that you're Daddy's Little Princess, that someone values you for something and considers you important and special, is fundamentally a good thing. The boys' t-shirts all say things like Little Troublemaker or Mr. Naughty. And it's bringing boys up with this sense that what are boys? Boys are naughty, boys are badly behaved, boys are annoying, boys are irritating. And actually that's kind of just an accepted part of who boys are. And that is so, so damaging and so, so toxic and so distressing. And that, that really is, for me, is the key to everything. You kind of bringing boys up to have some kind of sense of thought about others and some kind of positive self-worth, not kind of egotistical, Trumpian, I'm the centre of the universe, I'm always right, I'm amazing, I'm 1,000% great, but actual genuine sense of self-worth based on respect for others and their own sense of the kind of self-worth someone like Obama clearly has had, that kind of sense of being a man but entirely aware of male baggage and aware of his need to respect others. And that is so, so important. That's the most important thing I think any parent can do.
Right. Totally true. So we've sort of come to the end of the session. We kind of have to wrap up now because we've gone over the time. I mean, we've had such a great time talking to you, Anna. So I'm going to ask my final question. It's a bit of an obvious question, but we ask everyone that comes and does this, we ask them this question. So now you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So can you tell us, why do you support the cause to end violence against women, and what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Oh my goodness! I mean, it's almost like, I mean, why is the state? Kind of, is the Pope a Catholic? I mean, violence against women is so damaging for everyone. I mean, it's the whole of society is diminished by the way that, by any kind of violence, well, by any violence against anyone. But I mean, fundamentally, for me, it's just a huge political issue. You look at all the, the destruction, the environmental destruction that we're still happily countenancing, the kind of, the horrors, the sort of genocide that we're still happily witnessing across the world, right down to kind of little individual kind of stupidities on a kind of small scale level. And so much of it is driven by toxic masculinity, basically. And actually just creating a system in which men are forced to take some more responsibility and actually just kind of think a bit more and treat others with slightly more respect around them. I can't help feeling that's kind of would solve so many more problems. Not, domestic violence in an individual level and the destruction of the environment. I think for example, are just totally intrinsically linked. That kind of selfishness towards the individual, and that sense of male privileges over women is just hugely linked to a sense of male privilege over the environment. I mean, again, when you read about, I think the passage I read out right at the beginning had something where I'm comparing the battering ram going against the city wall to essentially to an act of rape. The battering ram is a phallic object, and when people talk, people talk about a city being raped, people talk about a city being raped or a city surrendering. It's sexual language. When people talk about the environmental destruction, they talk about things like, virgin rainforest being destroyed. You talk about people kind of penetrating into the heart of virgin rainforest things. It's massively sexualized, gendered violence language. So many of our problems come back to this. So many of all the issues, so many of the way the world is today, its unfairnesses, all come back to issues about male attitudes to violence against women. So maybe by confronting it, by talking about it, by suggesting, by either writing a book in which it just doesn't exist, isn't an issue, in which people just treat each other as equals regardless of their gender, or writing a book like I did, which really points out what gendered violence means and what male violence means. It's a huge thing. It really is a huge political thing for all kinds of things that you might not immediately think about when you think about gendered violence. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we all have a huge responsibility. I think we all have a huge responsibility, and whenever we write anything we write, to think about the male and female characters, and think about the violence we're writing, and think about what we're saying when we write it.
Sure. Thank you for that very interesting answer. Okay, so we've come to the end of our session, sort of, almost, you guys. So here I am again. I just want to thank everybody for your questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to ask your questions, but we sort of run out of time. But I'm now going to tell you about that. In the beginning of the session, I mentioned that Anna generously donated some really awesome goodies to the whole huge stash of swag that we have set up in our Rally Up fundraising page. I'm going to tell you what they are again. So she's donated 2 bundles. First is a beginner's guide to Anna Smith Spark bundle, which comprises 1 full set of the Empires of Dust trilogy. There they are. All 3 books, hardcover first edition books. They're going to be signed and personalized. And 1 hardcover copy of Legends 3, More Stories in Honor of David Gemmell. 1 hardcover copy of Unfettered 3, an anthology. 1 paperback copy of The Art of War, an anthology. And 1 paperback copy of Maeve, a Blackguard anthology. really awesome books. So many stories for you to get through. And as a bonus, Anna is throwing in a signed, no, 4 signed postcards and 2 signed bookmarks into this bundle. So that's just one bundle. The next thing is a Tuckerization, where Anna will make you a minor character in the next book. You can name it after yourself, name the character after anyone you like, and then you might be horribly killed off or tortured. Maybe you might even get to suggest what happens to you. So now there's only one type of each of these things. And they're available to anyone anywhere in the world. So you better hurry up and go and donate to get them, because once somebody snaps it up, it's gone. And we also have plenty more author goodies available from authors including Alison Goodman, Hilary Monahan, Sarah Langan, and it's Brit Week this week. So if you fancy goodies from some of the best British SFF authors today, you're in for a treat. We have all sorts of perks from, not just from Anna, we also have perks from Adrian Tchaikovsky, Juliet E. McKenna, Jen Williams, and Richard K. Morgan, all ready for donors as well. And going on as well, we also have a amazing auction featuring very, very extremely rare books from horror maestro Stephen Graham Jones. These books are so rare you can't even find them on eBay. So please do give generously. Help us reach our fundraising goal. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to end violence against women. I'm going to share a slide now with you guys so you can see the there you go. You can see the links, and our chat box moderators are going to put the links in the chat box as well. So if you want to go and get all these goodies, you go to our Rally Up page. It's R4P Rally Up 2019, and you can bid on Stephen Graham Jones's books also on Rally Up at bit.ly/SGJ Charity Auction 2019. And we have a lot more sessions coming up with more authors. If you want to learn more about those, we're going to put a link up in the chat box as well. Go to Read for Pixels and find out more about the campaign. And if you want to find out more about violence against women, what you can do about it, please do visit our webpage. The Pixel Project's website is www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so I think all that remains for us to do is say thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for that amazing discussion and all your amazing insights. It was really great to have you here today. And thank you guys for your questions, and I hope you had a good time. So we'll say goodbye. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. Thanks. Bye.